see. Her Majesty Claudia. So with this topic, Her Majesty Claudia, the dynamic that I'm talking about with the title is it's in relation to people who live in opulence, people who have such an abundance of choices, but these abundance of choices don't come out of hard work. They don't come out of sweat. It comes out of just existing. Uh, Now, a lot of modern men critique women. In this particular case, there's a modern trope on YouTube that women live life on recruit difficulty. And another example, children. In a way, children kind of live life in opulence and they don't really struggle to get things. And we can kind of see the moral difference a lot of times between children and adults. Now, you can make your own comparative analysis there, but I think the opulence that a person receives in the earlier end kind of spoils their morality. It spoils their moral compass, or at least it has a greater chance of doing that. Whereas a person who eventually gets to the point where they're in such high abundance, but they started from a very low point, their moral background is more diverse. They have a wider understanding of different circumstances. You hear the moniker. You hear people say, they've had a silver spoon in their mouth, or this person, trust fund babies. You hear that particular archetype come up a lot of times, and a lot of times people automatically assume that their moral compass is lower and that they don't have as much regard for a person as a person who would have less. Now, there's not necessarily a correlation there that I can draw, but you can infer at least the possibility that a person's moral compass is going to be significantly lower based off of the level of opulence, opportunities that just kind of happenstance just happen in their life. They don't really know any different. Now, in the dating market, women have most of the choice for the matter. They don't really have to risk rejection. They have an abundance of dating apps. They have Tinder, they have Snapchat, they have even out in public, a lot of women get hit on all the time. But the difference, I think, between the sexes and how this affects our social interactions is men don't really receive the level of attention, but then we can kind of see a difference in lifestyle and how that can possibly create a difference in morality, a difference in moral milestones that are reached for the sexes. A lot of women in the West live in opulence, especially compared to the women in other cultures, in other countries. They live in opulence in the dating market. They live in opulence in that we kind of have this desire to protect them from the harsh realities of the world. Whereas the men, we don't really seem to have a desire to protect men. We just kind of expect them to protect themselves, which this kind of lends itself to creating a person who is one more capable from an independent standpoint, but also a person who is naturally more accountable. Now, there's other issues associated with this, but I use Her Majesty Claudia as a way of explaining, as using royalty as an example. Imagine someone who came from royalty. They may not understand the plight of the people at the lower levels, but then more so their moral compass might also be based off of their subjective experience in the world, based off of how they experience the world, which is in opulence. And with opulence, you don't learn things such as self-control. You don't learn qualities such as how to discern between who is good and who is bad, who to trust, who not to trust. You don't discern Um, there's a lot of different skills and traits that kind of fall between the cracks. You're probably a more short-term thinker as a result. You're very short-sighted because you don't have to plan for the long run, for the long haul, because everything is handed to you, and you live in such abundance. Um, you live in such abundance that it's kind of overkill, and that you kind of have to work much harder than the average person in order to actually become moral. Um, Now, you do see people who have a lot of money, they won't give that money to their children. They'll tell their children to work hard and figure things out. And if something bad happens, they'll, intervene and help their children. But the reason why they're doing this is because they don't want to spoil the morality of the child or the morality of the person. They want the person to grow naturally and become upright and good. Now, in the West, we're kind of not doing this. We're kind of uh, we're kind of getting away from this, especially with modern women. Their opulence comes from the amount of attention they get, the amount of affection, romantic attention, things like that. They don't really have to struggle for it. And what we see as a result is lack of proper treatment, the lack of good treatment towards a lot of the men. Um, and you kind of see the same thing on the men's side, but it's in smaller proportions, I would argue. And this would come from the players. This would come from the men who, again, just like the average woman, this would come from the players who live in opulence, because those men would have such an abundance of options that their uh, desire or their need to treat someone well would kind of diminish, as a result of being, it's kind of a place of entitlement, or a place of, you know, when you're on your ivory castle and you're looking down, you see a bunch of people, a line of people coming to you. You don't really have to fight to get affection from another person and love and, things like that. So you're not really going to be motivated to, to actually, care too much about a person beyond just getting your needs met. Um, but yeah, um, the modern age, it empowers women to be more narcissistic. It empowers, as a result, people to be more greedy, and it gives us an overload of attention and an overload of just, it kind of creates a deficit in virtue, because we end up looking for these short-term things that give us just that next hit. Um, yeah, I use an example of the dating market and between men and women, but you can pretty much, uh, you can pretty much use this for anything in life. Whenever you're in a position of opulence in any particular thing, that's a place where you can grow morally, and that's a place where you can grow as a person. Her Majesty Claudia.